Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan, and I'm going to be the host of the CDL podcast. And obviously, many of you in the scene don't know me because I haven't ever been a content creator or anything in the scene, but I'm just actually a pretty big fan of competitive Call of Duty. I got my start probably about 7-ish years ago around the Black Ops 2 time. I played Call of Duty casually, started out in like COD 4, and never really knew about the competitive scene. But then one day I was homesick from school and I was just scrolling across YouTube and I discovered the Call of Duty Black Ops 2 Championship highlights from COD Champs. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. And I watched Optic and Complexity and all those teams. And I was like, I kind of like this. So I kind of watched it on and off through Ghosts. And then I really, really got into it when I started playing competitive a little bit more myself in Advanced Warfare. And just like I'm sure most people, I kind of started out as an Optic fan and really loved Scump and all those guys and Merc and Big T, but that kind of just transitioned me into just being more of a overall competitive COD fan. I still kind of liked Optic, but I just enjoyed watching all the matches. So that's pretty much where I come from. And what I'm going to be doing on this podcast is breaking down the CDL weekends, the matches, everything, roster drama, some current drama that actually just happened that we'll get into, and just an overall overview of my thoughts on the CDL. And I may be bringing on guests, some people that I play competitive COD with, and some of my friends, and we'll see how that goes. So, first, a story that just happened recently. Um, Doug Sensor Martin's dad posted a very interesting post to, I believe it was Instagram, yeah. And I see Lando tweeted it out before he quickly deleted it. And it's a picture of the Subliners logo, and it says NYSL or New York Subliners equals, quote, the Friends team, a breakdown of the team. He said, accuracy, tyrant, loser, bad leader, temp, hothead, bad team player, attach, lackey, Lamar ass kisser, Zuma, champ, nice guy, needs a spine, so kind of a backhanded compliment. Zero, poor team choice, but a champ. Happy, clearly ill prepared. Censor, his child. A four-time champ, proven leader, motivator, clear leader. New York City subliner solution, question mark. It's as plain as the nose on your face. And this was obviously quickly deleted, as I'm sure Doug urged him to delete that. And just some quick thoughts on that. I'm assuming it's probably because Censor probably talked to his dad about the roster and was understandably upset about not getting the chance to play after the recent news that they're benching Zero in favor of Happy. I can understand the frustrations of maybe he's been certainly grinding and posting his streams and his stream highlights and stuff, and saying that he maybe deserves a spot on the roster. So I can understand his frustration. He probably aired that to his dad, like frustrated that he's not getting a chance to play in LA this weekend. But at the same time, man, how as a parent can you post that? It's just like in youth sports or any level, it's like LeVar Ball. You can't openly bash the team. It's not going to help your son at all, especially when your son's, I mean, Doug is a star in terms of followers and social media influence and overall like personality, but he's not a star in terms of player. He's always been a lower tier player, a solid one, but lower tier nonetheless. And this just isn't going to help his case at all, especially with the brand of the team. You don't want to have players clashing, especially sub players. It's never something you want, is a sub getting more attention than the team's well-being. So when he posted this, it's kind of become a meme in the community, and I simply can't believe that he posted it. And I don't think Censor has said anything, at least up to this point. I'm recording this the day after that post, so I'm unsure if Censor said anything. I don't believe he has, but I can't imagine that's going to help his stock. All right, so now I'm going to quickly get into my predictions for CDL LA. This podcast is being recorded a decent bit after the events of CDL Atlanta, so I don't want to get into that too much, but I will say I was surprised that it wasn't a Chicago Atlanta final because, as with everybody, I believe those are likely the two best teams. Um, I was surprised that FaZe was down 2-0 against, I believe it was Paris. I can't exactly remember. And then they ended up getting that reverse sweep. And I also wasn't shocked. A lot of people were, I know I was listening to the Hard Points podcast. I'm a big fan of that. And everyone but, I can't remember who, I think Maven, it might have been, was predicting that Minnesota wasn't going to get out. And I really thought Minnesota was going to make it out, and they ended up making it out. And I actually am from Wisconsin, so I went to the inaugural CDL event in Minnesota, and it was a really fun time. And there I was pretty impressed by Minnesota, even though they got the free win or whatever you want to call it against the LA Gorillas. But I was overall very impressed with Minnesota. I think they're a roster that doesn't have like superstars apart. Maybe God RX is a superstar, but I think that overall they're a roster that has a lot of potential to be a solid top four team throughout the year and maybe cause some upsets and make a few finals. I don't know if they'll win anything, but I think they're going to be a solid playoff type team that's never going to be an easy out. So now moving on to CDL Los Angeles, I got to pull up the bracket here. I saw it from Deserto, posted it. Yeah, so starting with the Group A, which is the Minnesota Rocker, Seattle Surge, LA Gorillas, and OGLA. Some interesting teams in here. A lot of struggling teams. As you all know, OGLA has yet to win a series. They're really struggling. The Gorillas, some crazy roster changes, taking out veterans Aches, Lacefield, and Saints, and subbing them in with, I believe it was Blast, Vivid, and Spart. And excuse me, but I don't know too much about Vivid and Spart. They're rather new players. I do know enough about Blast. He's been a solid player since he came out of the S&D scene. But the first match we're going to look at in Group A is the Minnesota Rocker versus Seattle Surge. Now, this is an interesting matchup because on paper, when you look at the Seattle Surge, you'd think this is a team that's consistently top four. They're going to win a lot of their matches, but they're actually struggling immensely. I believe they've only won either one or two series. But when you look at that roster, they benched Enable, who's been known as a very solid kind of OBJ player over the last few years. He's actually won an event in the last two games. He won Stage 2 playoffs with TK in World War II, and then he actually won two events with 100 Thieves, as well as taking second at Champs in Black Ops 4. So their current roster now, with Enable being subbed out for Pander, is Octane, Karma, Pander, I'm blanking the other two players, Slacked, and Apathy. So a team of, Octane, obviously, a top three, arguably top one AR every year. Slacked, a really solid SMG, good leader and submachine gun player, excuse me. And then Apathy, kind of an up and down player, seems to pick it up towards the latter half of games, but still another really solid player. And Karma, 3 rings, everybody knows, great player. And then Pander, one of Octane's best friends. And I remember him from Ghost Gaming in World War II. I believe he played with Parasite, Lacefield, and God RX. And I think he's a solid player. I'm not going to try to break him down at all because I'm not too familiar, but I think he's a solid player. I don't know if he's as good or better or worse than Enable, but we'll have to see. And then you've got the Minnesota roster, who I don't know how great they really are, but personally I'm kind of high on them. I'm kind of from the area. I'm a little bit of a Minnesota fan. So in this matchup, I just think God RX is going to be just too much. I think that team overall is going to be better. I don't think it's going to be like a blowout series. I think that it will be close, but I think Silly, Alex, GodRX, Asam, Asim, I'm not really sure how to say it, and Assault, a good turret AR. I think that they will win this matchup. The only way I see Seattle winning this is if Octane completely outplays Assault, which obviously he's very capable of doing. He's probably a better player than Assault. But I think that Octane outplaying Assault won't be enough unless players around him step up, simply because I think that Minnesota's supporting cast around the main AR of Assault is better than Seattle's is right now. Seattle has the talent to do it, but I just don't think they're ready right now. So I'm going to pick Minnesota in that one. And then in the other matchup, we kind of have a bottom of the barrel matchup, although I understand why it's happening because it's the LA home series. They want both LA teams to for sure play each other. So this one is for the old school fans. It's an OGLA versus LA Gorillas, Aches versus Optic. I know it's not really the same Optic anymore, but it's also not Aches versus Optic because Aches got benched, so that kind of storyline was eliminated. But the new LA Gorillas roster, like I said earlier, Decimate and who was the other person still in the starting lineup? Decimate and Aqua are still in the starting lineup, joined by Vivid, Blast, and Spart. Vivid and Spart are the two new pickups, and then Blast was obviously their substitute player. I'll be honest, I'm not too confident in my analysis of this roster because I know enough about Blast. I know he's a solid player. He hasn't been as good as his hype was coming in out of the S&D scene, but he's been a solid player. And then Aqua, I've always been a big fan. I think ever since Black Ops 3, when I kind of got to know him in AW in those 2 jetpack games at Champs and playing with Nagafen and Elevate in those rosters and Rise, I think he's a really good slayer and a really good player. And then I'm not too sure about Vivid and Spart. I know they're young guns, so I'm assuming they play pretty fast. I really don't know. I could be completely speaking wrong there. Um, I think that's a solid team. Once again, on paper, you see this OGLA team though, and they look like they should be the best team in the game. I mean, Slasher, Dashy, TJ, um, JCap, and Kenny, and that team over the last few years, those players have been. Slasher's always a consistent top player. Kenny has been amazing the last few years. TJ and Dashy both amazing too, and JCap's just a solid veteran. Maybe doesn't have the gun skill as well as he once did, but just a solid player overall. You'd expect that team to be great, and I think I'm going to go on a limb here and say OGLA is going to get their first win. I think all the new players of the LA Gorillas maybe playing in their first LAN environment. I believe that's the first LAN match for Vivid and Spart on like a main stage. I know they played in like challengers and stuff in open bracket, but I'm not sure if they've ever played on main stage. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be completely wrong on that. But I think that I'm going to take OGLA to win this. So that would set up for a losers bracket elimination match in Group A of the LA Gorillas versus the Seattle Surge. And I don't want to go too much into this one because I actually don't think this matchup will be very close. I'm going to pick the Seattle Surge because I think that the roster change might just be a wake-up call for everyone and give them kind of a fresh face in the lineup. And I think Pander, talent-wise, isn't too much of a downgrade of Enable. And I actually kind of think Seattle could have a pretty good weekend. I just really like where Minnesota is, which is why I picked them to beat Seattle. But I think Seattle's going to take this one against the LA Gorillas in the losers match relatively easy. I would want to say I think it could be 3-0, 3-1 type of territory. So then we've got the two winners, the winners match to get out of the bracket. Minnesota versus OGLA, and once again, you guys kind of know I'm a pretty big Minnesota fan. Their roster isn't crazy flashy on paper, but I think it's a very good roster. And talent-wise, I think OGLA has them outmatched in any game but Modern Warfare. For whatever reason, it just hasn't clicked yet with OGLA, and maybe in their home series and kind of, you know, with the rumors of possibly a Pharaoh roster change, they're going to kick it into gear and they're going to play really well because with the talent on that team, I could see them turning it around and winning an event at any time despite of how horrible they've looked. But I'm going to take Minnesota here. I really want to take OGLA because I just have this weird feeling that players that good, like Slasher and Kenny, they just can't stay down for that long. But I'm going to say they lose this match to get out of groups, but they stay alive, obviously, because they have one more match after winning their first match against the Gorillas. And I'm going to say Minnesota gets out of the group in a 3-2 fashion. I think it is going to be a close series. So then the losers bracket side of Group A would be the OGLA versus Seattle Surge. And I'm going to make a weird pick here, and I know you might call me stupid for it, but I'm gonna say OGLA is gonna win that. It's gonna win that match. Obviously, based on the history of the league, both these teams have struggled severely, and Seattle's probably looked better. So you might call me an idiot for that, but honestly, we're picking between two crapshoot teams, and I would have never thought that coming into this year because the Seattle Surge roster, once again on paper, filled with decorated veterans who have been great Call of Duty players for a very long time. And same with the OGLA, not as much veterans. TJ and Dashy are still pretty young. Same with Kenny, he's relatively young in the scene. But over the few years that they've played, they've established themselves as great players. All of them. I mean, obviously, JCav has established himself, two-time world champ. Slasher's a world champ. Dashy and TJ have won events. Kenny's won events. They're all great players. And for that reason, I think they're going to finally turn it around now, because if they don't, pretty soon it's just going to get too far behind and they're going to be out of the playoff race, first team out, and just out really early. So I'm going to say that OGLA is going to pull this one off for Seattle, and Seattle might be looking to make another roster change or bring Enable back in. So my two teams coming out of Group A would be Minnesota out of the winners and then OGLA out of the losers. Then moving on to Group B, we have, in my opinion, a much stronger group with Atlanta FaZe, Florida Mutineers, Dallas Empire, and the New York Subliners. So in this bracket, I think it's a lot heavier stacked with really good teams, and I could see upsets happening. And the first match we're going to go into is Atlanta FaZe versus the Florida Mutineers. Now this is a rematch of the CDL Atlanta finals, kind of a surprise finals, but the Florida Mutineers were able to make it there. And once again, I think Florida very solid team. When I looked at their roster going into the year, a bunch of people were really just putting them down and saying that they weren't going to be that good. But every time I looked at the roster, I saw a solid team that would win some series. I never saw like an event winning team, which they got to the finals, so clearly they were decently close in Atlanta. But I never saw them as a finals winning team, I guess you'd say. But I saw them as like a top six potential team with maybe the potential to get hot on a weekend and get top three. I mean, you've got players like Pristini, a world champ who doesn't get respect, and Skies and Havoc. They're solid players. Mox, solid player. It's just a team full of just overall solid players. I don't really know how else to say them. They're not superstar flashy, but they're just really good overall players. That they're not going to ever be super inconsistent, and I believe they're always going to keep you in series. But in this case, just like it was in the Atlanta final 3-0, I think that FaZe are going to be too much. I think they're going to 3-1 them because I think coming out first series of the weekend, they might start out a little slow. And I think maybe Florida will steal a map, maybe a search and destroy, although I doubt it because Atlanta's been so good at search, so maybe they'll steal a dom or something. I'm not sure. But I think Florida will get a map, but I think Atlanta FaZe cleans this one up pretty easy because as of right now, we've got to call them the best team in the game, especially with Chicago not being at this event. Then moving on to the next matchup, we have Dallas Empire versus the New York Subliners. This is another team that I'm kind of a fan of this New York team. I think they have so much talent, and they are subbing in Happy for Zero, which some of you might not really know Happy because there may be a lot of you that are kind of new to the scene, but I could be incorrect, but I think the last time Happy played in the Pro League was Black Ops 3, and I can't remember. I feel like he was on like H2K or Cloud9. I just can't really remember what team he was on, but he was a solid overall player. And then I'm not really sure what happened to him after Black Ops 3 because I didn't see too much of him, and I don't believe I saw him in the Pro League. I don't know if he took a break from competing or what happened, but the last time I remember him really competing at a pro level was Black Ops 3, and I remember him being not a superstar, but he was a solid player. So I wonder how that'll be because Zero is one of the most storied European players and loved over there in Europe. So I wonder how that move will be taken. But in this matchup, I think I'm going to have to go Dallas Empire. With the roster change from the Subliners, they could be scrambling a little bit. And Dallas, despite losing a decent amount of maps, most of their losses have come against Chicago and Atlanta, who I think are the clear-cut two best teams. And I think Dallas has been really solid. And once again, this New York roster, Attach, Temp, Accuracy, Zuma, that's talented players. They got a world champ on the team in Attach, and they're just overall a really talented team. But for some reason, just like OGLA, it hasn't really clicked for them yet. And I think it could click for them this weekend in LA. But I don't think it's this match. I think Dallas takes it relatively easy, maybe a 3-1. So that leaves our losers bracket match, elimination match, as Florida versus New York. And to me, this is a really tough match because the logical pick seems like it'd be Florida. They're coming off a final. Everybody's really high on them right now. They're a solid team. They've clearly been the better team over New York this year. But there's just something about New York. I feel like they could win this matchup. But I think I'm going to go with the safe pick and pick Florida. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if New York wins this. But I think the roster change close to the event could screw with them a little bit. Might not have their strategies down 100%. Plus, I just kind of want the bombshell to happen, I'll be honest. I like the COD scene drama. I kind of want the bombshell to happen. I want them to lose both matches, and then all of a sudden Doug comes in like Superman, maybe drops a .7, and they maybe finally win a series or something. I don't know. I just don't think New York has the firepower to win it right now for whatever reason, despite this roster being very talented. This Call of Duty is just weird, something we've never seen. So that leaves us with the winners round match out of Group B, the team advancing out of winners in that bracket. It would be between Atlanta, FaZe, and the Dallas Empire. Now, going into the year, people would see this as a juggernaut matchup because many people had this as teams 1 and 2 in their power rankings before the CDL started, with Chicago coming in at 3 on most people's. I was under the impression before the year that I was putting FaZe 1, Huntsman 2, and Empire 3, and I actually had the Surge in New York up right behind them, and obviously I was wrong on that. I had Paris pretty low, just like everybody else. But in this matchup, I think it's going to be a really good one. I think that Dallas is continuing to improve, and I think LAN experience for Shotzi and Illy can only continue to help as it happens more and more as they get more tournaments under their belt. but I don't think their experience helps enough here. I think it's impossible to pick against FaZe right now. We haven't seen them lose a series yet. I just don't think you can pick against them. So I'm gonna have to go FaZe here, and I think they're gonna do it in quick fashion, 3-0, maybe 3-1, which is weird because I just talked up Dallas a little bit, but I just think FaZe is on a different level right now. I think early in the tournament, Dallas gets knocked out pretty easy by them. So then the losers bracket to move on out of Group B would be between the Florida Mutineers and the Dallas Empire. And another really interesting matchup. This is what I love about the CDL this year is there's almost no freebie matchup. I mean, even the worst team right now, you have to say, is OGLA. But I feel like that team could beat any team in the game with the talent they have. And this is another matchup like this. When you see the caliber of players on Dallas and Hook, Crimsix, Clayster, and the two young guns, Illy and Shotzi, and then you look at Florida's team, which is not as storied of players, more kind of diamond in the rough players, scrap team players, a few Gen G players from last year, players that just are underappreciated, like Pristini, a world champion from last year. It feels like they should probably get bodied by Dallas if we're being honest. But I don't think they do. I think it's a really close series, and coming off the high of Atlanta, I think Florida should have kind of an advantage here, but I think it almost might play to their disadvantage. I don't think by any means I'm not calling them out or saying that they're going to be complacent, but I think they might overlook teams when they come here, and I just think the talent of Dallas finally comes and shows out and beats a maybe well organized, better at the moment team in Florida. And I think Dallas gets this, but I think this is a close series. I think this is a 3-2, and I could very easily be wrong about this, and I could see Florida taking it, but I'm going to go with Dallas. All right, so for the semifinals, that means that out of the first slot in Group A, I'd have Minnesota, and I believe that means they'd be playing the second slot out of Group B, which would be Dallas. So I think that's another very interesting matchup coming into the year. I think anybody would pick Dallas over Minnesota, but I think this is a really close series. And at this point, I think so far this year, I would say Minnesota's the better team. But on paper, once again, you would think Dallas is better. This is a really tough matchup to predict because I'm just unsure of which way to go. I like Minnesota more. I'm not a huge Crimsix fan or Clayster. I mean, they're all right, but I don't know. I think they're both good at this game, but I think Ilya and Shotzi's struggles have kind of turned me off to the team. Once again, it's another team like OGLA. I could see them turning up. I could see them winning this event. I think they have supreme talent to most teams there if everything clicks. But I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I think this would be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to take Minnesota to beat Dallas 3-2. I think it's a close series. I could see Dallas 3-0ing them. I could see Minnesota 3-0ing Dallas. I think this early in the year with the inconsistencies of so many teams, it's very tough to make a prediction as to who we think is going to win with a lot of confidence because there's been so many variables and so many different decisions going on. So that would put Minnesota in the finals for me, man. Some of you are going to roast me for that. Then the other match would be the winners bracket team out of Group B versus the losers bracket team out of Group A, and I'm probably going to get roasted for this one too. It's kind of an OG classic matchup in the COD scene, Optic versus FaZe. So I have OGLA, which I'm sure I'll get roasted for, coming out of their bracket, out of the loser side, because quite honestly, they've been horrendous this year. But I feel like at some point a slasher team's got to turn it around, and pretty soon if they don't turn around, they're done for. So I think they're going to turn around right here at home. Maybe they'll finally have a crowd behind them that doesn't hate them, but yeah, we'll see. Might help that Chicago's not there for the real versus fake Optic rivalry. But it's OGLA versus Atlanta FaZe. Now, as much as I want to be controversial and make the pick of OGLA to the finals, if they would be playing any other team, maybe if they would play like Dallas coming out of Group B, I would have maybe predicted them to win, but I just can't predict them to beat FaZe. I think it's impossible to predict anybody to beat FaZe right now until we see them be beaten. I think that OGLA is going to have a really good, solid weekend to build off. If they get 2 wins at home in LA, I think that's a really solid weekend for them considering they haven't won a single match yet. I think that's a good building block. Maybe then they can decide if they want to make a change. I think that the rumors I've heard of Enable to OGLA is not a horrible idea. I mean, he played with Slasher and Kenny last year. They had success. I think he's got a little more gun skill at this point in his career than JCap. And I think that with Slasher on that team and then Enable joining it, I think they'd have enough veteran leadership to lose Cap and be able to listen to Enable and Slasher. It just matters if the young guns want to listen to him or not. I've heard Dashy and TJ have some issues with that, possibly last year with Crim6, but who knows? I don't have inside information on that. But yeah, I think FaZe is going to just overwhelm Optic with their talent. I'm going to give Optic a map just because why not? Be a little controversial. I'm going to say FaZe 3-1 Optic. So that moves us into the finals. I don't think my finals is terribly controversial. Minnesota versus Atlanta. I think that maybe some people would say Atlanta versus Dallas would probably be their final, or they'd put, I don't really think you can put anybody else out of Group A in the finals besides Minnesota. I don't think OGLA, LA Gorillas, or Seattle would be popular picks. I think most people would probably put maybe Atlanta versus either Florida or Dallas, and then maybe Minnesota as like that other fourth team, which is what I have. So I don't think this is terribly controversial. I didn't go too out on a limb besides my OGLA pick. But I think that I got to go with Atlanta. I really want to go with Minnesota because that way if they end up winning, I can look like a genius. But I think I have to go with Atlanta until I see them show some more vulnerability like we saw with Chicago. That's why I wasn't completely sold on Chicago winning that last event, because we saw some vulnerability in some series, and then I think they 3-2'd Toronto in the first round in Atlanta, and then the week before in London they reverse swept. No, they didn't reverse sweep, but they won 3-2 against Paris. So they showed some vulnerability. We haven't really seen that. I know FaZe did get down 2-0 in Atlanta, but they reverse swept, and they've just looked overall stronger than Chicago, even though Chicago's looked amazing. I just think Atlanta is just a little bit too powerful right now. I think that Celium's a great player. I think Simp is an absolute freak. I think Abizi is, people are starting to really gas him up and praise him now, but I think Abizi is cracked. I think he is one of the best entry players I've ever seen. The way he slides in front of teammates without fear is something that anybody desires in some machine gun player. You always want that guy who's going to slide in front of you to make you look better. And on top of that, he's not only sliding in, he's sliding and picking up two pieces. You've got Major Maniac, who I've always really liked as a player. I think he's a great S&D player, oldest player in the CDL according to Puckett. All jokes, but I think he's a really solid player. And then Priesta, kind of the veteran of this team, if you will. Obviously not a very old player, but once again, a really good, he's kind of like a player in basketball that's a good role player. I don't want to, I kind of said that wrong. I don't want to make it sound like Priesta's some bench player, role player. He's obviously a star player, but he's just like a glue guy. He's like that wing shooter that spots up and is just like averaging 15 points a game, but he just fills in every gap you need on defense and fills in every gap you need on offense. He's just he's just a glue guy. He does every little thing that you ask him to. He can run whatever role. He's just such a solid, versatile player, and I think he's going to be a great player for years to come. Yeah, so there are my predictions. I believe that Minnesota and OGLA, kind of going on a limb, are going to get out of Group A. And then Group B, I believe that Atlanta FaZe and the Dallas Empire are going to make it out. It's not too bold, but that's what I believe is going to happen. So then, just a little bit after these predictions, I wanted to talk about some of the roster moves that I touched on a bit while talking about some of the matches. I can't think if there's any other roster moves besides the ones I mentioned, but like I said, the LA Gorillas one I think is a very interesting move, because while I can't talk on the caliber of player that Vivid and Spart are, like I said, I do know Blast, but I think it's a really interesting move because I would not bench Decimate or Aqua. I know none of them have played that good this year, but I think Decimate and Aqua are good foundational pieces. I think Aqua's a very good AR player. Pretty slay heavy AR player too, as he was on his teams in AW that took second in champs. And I think that Decimate is a solid S&D player, a young gunner, a good SMG player, just a good foundational piece. I think Ake's time might be up. I think he only wins on a team nowadays that has a lot of talent around him, because people like to give him a little more longer of a leash recently because of his Champs World War II win. But outside of his World War II Champs win, I think his last win before that was AW. And then he took 1 second place at, I think it was Seattle in World War II. But, I mean, if you take away his Champs win in World War II, I don't think he's won since AW, and it's been a rough stretch. He wasn't all that great in Black Ops 3. IW, same thing. Then, obviously, World War II, he won Champs in. I'm not going to take anything away from him. They had an easier bracket, but it still takes a hell of a run to win it. Beat a very good TK team in the finals. but I think his time was up. I don't think that was a bad move. But I am more interested in the dropping of Saints and Lacefield. And I know Saints has a reputation of being a kind of a toxic player and tough to play with, so that could definitely be a factor in it. I have no idea. But I could see that being a factor that maybe Aqua and Decimate, who the Gorillas have clearly prioritized as their foundation pieces, just did not like playing with Saints. But the Lacefield one is interesting to me. I know he maybe used to have problems with being a little toxic of a teammate, but I don't know if he is anymore. And to me, Lacefield is a pretty irreplaceable player on a team. It's kind of shocking to me that he hasn't had a lot of pro league time since Black Ops 3 and over the last few years. He spent that World War II years in AM on Ghost Gaming and stuff. But overall, I think that Lacefield is just a player. I saw people talking about it on Twitter too after he got dropped. To me, Lacefield is a player. We talk about cracked nowadays. He's a little bit older, but he plays cracked. He is up in your face, sliding in front of you. And to me, with a player like Aqua, who's an AR with wants people to slide in front of him, and I know Decimate could bait and be like an entry guy, but to me it seems like Lacefield will just slide in front of you, and another guy who has the potential to pick up two pieces when he slides in. He seems like a pretty invaluable player, and I don't know if I would have benched him yet. And like I said, I don't know much about Vivid and Spart, so they could be the same thing and even better than Lacefield, and I could just be talking out of my ass. But I think that Lacefield should have maybe stayed in the starting lineup, and then maybe you sub in Blast and I can't say Vivid or Spart, but I think maybe subbing in Blast for Aches, a 1-for-1, and then whoever you like more out of Vivid and Spart and whatever role fits better, maybe for Saints. But if I were them, I would give Lacefield a little more run, because Lacefield to me is a very unique player, and I think he's a very fiery player, and I think he's a guy that I would like to have on my team. And then looking at the Seattle roster, we see Pander in for Enable, and to me this seems more like a friendship type of sub, because overall as a player, the way they're decorated and showcased, obviously Enable is a more decorated player than Pander. Pander's never won anything. Enable is a decorated multi-FPS player from Halo and COD. But I think this is just a point where Enable maybe wasn't grinding the game as much as the team liked him to. They're struggling mightily record-wise for a team with a lot of talent, and I feel like just like in regular sports, when you're struggling so bad on a team that has so much talent, you look for a scapegoat and you just look to make a change to see if it'll help. And I think that's kind of what this team is doing with Pander, and he's Octane's best friend, I've heard. So that just seems like a 1-for-1 move to me that I don't see it having that much of a negative impact, to be honest, and that might be kind of controversial because I think Enable's a really good player, but this game seems very slay heavy to me, and I don't think Pander has any worse gun skill than Enable, and I think KD wise they'll be the same. It's just a matter of if Pander wants to play OBJ. If he's willing to play OBJ like Enable would, then I think they'll be just as good, if not better. But if he's not willing to slide in first like Enable would and play more of an OBJ role, they'll get worse. I just don't see this as being a huge impact. Maybe they'll get a lot better, but I don't see it as a huge net positive or negative. I think they're either going to get a little better or a little worse. I don't see them turning into some top caliber team or see them turning into some absolute bottom feeder team. All right, and then the last roster move I think I can think of is the New York Subliners, and this is another one that's kind of up in the air. I don't know how much better they get. They subbed out Zero, their European player, for Happy. This is kind of, it seems like, another friendship move. I'm not sure. Obviously, Doug didn't get subbed in, as we talked about with his dad's post, but I think, and I could be completely off base, but I think Happy is pretty good friends with the Zoom Unattached duo and also Temp. I think they're pretty good friends. That could be completely wrong, but I think they are. And I didn't understand the Happy pickup as a substitute when it was first announced before the CDL started, because as a fan, I had only seen him really last in Black Ops 3, so I didn't know that he was really still playing competitively. But I knew he was good in Black Ops 3, like I mentioned earlier, so I didn't completely question it. And obviously guys like Attach and Zuma and Temp know Call of Duty better than me and are much better than me, so I'm assuming they had way more insight than I do. But it seemed like an odd pickup, and now we're going to see if it was a good or a bad pickup because he's coming in. But to me, I don't know. I think it makes sense who they subbed him out for, because I think the Zoom Unattached duo are your maybe not superstars as players, although they are great players, but they're kind of your face of your franchise type of player, like a Scump. It was always impossible for Scump to ever get benched on Optic because obviously he was a very good player and he wasn't going to get benched, but because he's also the face of Call of Duty and he's the face of their team. And Zuma and Attach are the face of their team. They're two of the most followed players. They were on FaZe for years. They're loved by many fans. So I can't see Zuma and Attach getting benched, and then Temp, another young player who's an absolute beast on the sticks usually. So good, such a talented player. I can't see him getting benched. And then it comes down to accuracy, and I don't think Happy plays a main AR. I'm not sure. And accuracy is also a slow turret main AR, another really good friend of Attach's. So I can't see him getting benched. And then they're all American. You got the odd European left out, and it happens to be Zero. And now it's interesting to me because a lot of American and North American fans don't really love the European players as much, but I really love Zero. I think he's a great player. I've always liked Zero, I think, on his Splice teams and Red Reserve. He was a top tier player. I think he got kind of screwed over playing some roles in like World War II that he shouldn't have been in, with Rated being a main AR. But I've always thought that Zero is a great player. So this move is interesting to me. I think usually I would say the team gets a lot worse by this move, but they've been so bad this year that maybe it's just a vibe thing and Happy's good friends with them, and maybe he'll bring the Happy vibes, pun intended. And maybe he'll turn this team around, but I can't see him turning it around a lot. So it's another one of those moves like Seattle, where the 1-for-1 moves, especially in a 5v5 format now, I just don't think they make that much of a difference. And now we say that, but the Pharaoh for Priesta swap last year for 100 Thieves made all the difference. But I think the level of talent on that team was a lot better than this team, and I just don't see it making a huge difference. I think it's the same thing as Seattle. It's going to be a small net positive or a small net negative. I just could see this team blowing up soon because the whole Doug thing. I wonder what'll happen with that. But I don't see this being a huge show-stopping move that's going to change a whole lot of things. All right, so those were my predictions for CDL Los Angeles, and my thoughts on some of the recent roster changes, the Doug Censor Martin dad drama. I can't believe I just said those words all in a sentence. You learned a little bit about me, where I come from, my history in the scene. I'd like to be doing this podcast maybe twice weekly, possibly doing maybe on Mondays, like a CDL, whatever series it was, wrap up my thoughts on the series of the weekend. And then maybe towards Friday, the end of the week, doing like I did on this episode, like a CDL Los Angeles or whatever city it is, prediction episode for the week. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, and I finally am a college student. I finally made myself enough money to buy some of the equipment to do it. So it'd mean a lot to me if you supported me. My roommate's also big into competitive COD. I have some friends from back home and stuff that really love it. So I may get them on as like special guests for some episodes, just to talk about their predictions and stuff for it as well. This is something, like I said, I really wanted to do for a while. I think it's really fun. I mean, I kind of lost track of time recording this one. I thought it'd be short and sweet, but I kind of drew on for a while. It's just something I love to talk about, and I listened to the Hard Points podcast, and I listened to I can't remember, it used to be called Trading Shots, whatever that show is on YouTube now, I can't remember, Contesting the Point, and it's like a first take setting, and I've always been a big sports fan and a big COD fan, and I've always thought I could talk about it, so I thought, why not give it a shot? It's something I absolutely love to do. I hope that showed through in this podcast, that I love the Call of Duty scene. I love competitive COD. I love the personalities. I love the drama. I love everything about it. Kind of like Maven always says, he loves the drama. That's what makes the COD scene so great compared to some other esports scenes. And I absolutely love it. And it's something I've always wanted to pursue. So I thought, why not start a podcast? I'm going to try to get it on as many platforms as I can. So I can't really tell you where you can find it yet. But yeah, I think this is going to try to be a maybe twice a week thing, at least once a week thing. Something I really enjoy doing, so it'd mean a lot to me if you supported the CDL Weekly Podcast. This has been Ryan, and I am out. I will see you next time.